Well, good afternoon, everyone. We hope you had a wonderful lunch. Welcome back. Ready for our last couple of sessions. Hard to believe the Institute is 3/4 of the way done. We so appreciate you tuning in. I know there's lots of things happening this afternoon, so we appreciate you coming back and staying with us as we go forward. If you'd like to, we invite you to say hello in the chat. We've got a couple of visitors and presenters with us here from out of state. Certainly they're very familiar with adult education, but it's always great to welcome them from our state. A couple of housekeeping things for everyone are that remember that if you are seeking continuing education hours, you would want to complete the sketch application form at the end of the Institute. You'll just turn in one form at the end of the Institute in its entirety. Also, all of the recordings from today and all the materials will be made available. Please allow us a couple of days to compile everything and get everything turned around back to you, but we will do so probably next week and get that all that information to you. If you have questions, comments about the Institute, you can certainly send me a chat, a private message in the chat, and then certainly throughout our presentation as well. If you have questions or comments that you'd like to make, our presenters would invite you to do that as well. I'm very excited that they really accepted our invitation to speak today. I think it's so important that we understand not only as a state what's happening across our state, but that we recognize and can connect with trends from other states. That's one of the most valuable pieces, I think, of the professional development and networking within our field, is that we do need to reach out to one another and understand what's going on for the benefit of the people that we're serving. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our guest speakers. The first is Cheryl Hart. She is the National Association for State Directors of Adult Education Immediate Past Chair. She's also the Deputy Associate Superintendent in the Arizona Department of Education for Adult Education Services. And her colleague and a great leader in the field of adult education, Patricia Tyler, she is the National Association of State Directors of Adult Education Executive Director. And they're here today to present and talk to us about the national adult education landscape. So thank you both for being here and welcome from Michigan.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm really thrilled to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. My name, as Patrick said, is Cheryl Hart, and I'm the State Director of Adult Education out of the Arizona Department of Education office, where it's a K through 12 agency. And I'm happy to be here with Patricia Tyler. I'm going to turn it over to her to just, if she wants to say a couple words before we get started.
Sure. Thank you, Cheryl, and thank you, Patrick. I also am delighted to be here with you today in Michigan, virtually. I've been in this role at NASDAE for 5 years now. Prior to that, I was with the State Administration of Adult Education in Maryland for 20 years, the last 9 years of that as the state director. And before that, I was 7 years in a local adult ed program where I started off as a part-time instructor and then did a little bit of everything, wrote grants, managed data collection, coordinated programs. So, I've been from the bottom rung of the ladder in adult education through many wonderful experiences. So let me turn it back to Cheryl now to give you a quick overview.
Thank you, Pat. So here's just a really overview of the session topics that we're going to try to cover today. Pat will give a NASDAE overview of the organization. Then we're going to jump into NASDAE's ongoing initiatives, the professional development, and the information sharing activities that we perform, and then go into new practices on the radar. So we're going to start with the NASDAE overview. And so I'm going to turn it over to Pat to provide this.
Okay, thanks, Cheryl. So NASDAE overview. We've actually been incorporated since 1990, but we formerly went by the name of the National Adult Education Professional Development Consortium. And not only is that a mouthful, but you can't turn it into an acronym that you can easily pronounce. And if you can, please send me an email or a voice message so I can hear it. Nevertheless, this was the organization was organized to provide support to state directors of adult education, and membership is open to all 50 states and the 7 territories that are funded under the federal program. And NASDAE works to support the state directors and their staffers in the implementation of the federally funded program authorized by the WIOA, which I'm sure you know is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. So, and then on the next slide, the mission of NASDAE is to support and advance the state leadership of adult education throughout the states and territories. And, you know, going beyond that, our vision is that every program will be of quality and excellence as we together increase literacy and prepare adults to be contributing members of our society through family, work, community, and health. And NASDAE strives to be a leading voice in adult education. And then next slide. So our main purpose is to coordinate and develop some professional development and training for state leadership and their staff. We serve as a catalyst for policy review and development. And then we work very hard to disseminate broadly current direct information on the field of adult education. And we'll be giving you examples of how we do these throughout this presentation today. And then next slide. Okay, so we have for the past couple of years been very much focused on equity. We believe that adult education services are an investment in equity, a chance for students and the system itself to mitigate the opportunity gap that's resulted from centuries of unequal availability of high quality programs. So the concept of equity is currently woven through all of the programs that we do and everything we do to help state directors and to work with states in their implementation. I'll turn it back to Cheryl now.
Thank you, Pat. So we're gonna jump into our ongoing initiatives, and the first one, as Pat just mentioned, is equity, and the effort to weave equity into everything we do. But one of the first things that we did was draft and issue a pretty strong statement on equity and policy consideration. So this statement, and there's a screenshot of it, and also a link to the PDF in the PowerPoint, and we will provide the PowerPoint so that you have the links. This was drafted and issued by the NASDAE board in May 2021. And it's meant to articulate the importance of adult education in addressing opportunity gaps and systemic injustices. And most importantly, the role that state administration and policy considerations can play in bridging these gaps. So I hope that you'll take a look at this equity statement. It goes into, it makes some pretty strong statements as far as where the NASDAE board stands and how we're trying to help state administrators make sure that equity is addressed and definitely a consideration in policy. So the next initiative that I'm going to turn it back over to Pat to describe, but it's the NASDAE Adult Education Fact Sheets. So Pat, do you want to provide some background on this?
Sure, be glad to. So we have a long tradition of producing fact sheets, one pager for each state and one for the US totals. And we used to call that the Adult Education Blue Book under the old organization name. About 3 years ago, we significantly modified the format and the data sets that we use to highlight the need for adult education, the funding levels, and some participation information. So these fact sheets have proved invaluable to us. A lot of we missed a year, and we certainly got a lot of feedback from the field about where are these fact sheets. We really want to look at this. So what these do is give you a snapshot of what is happening in the state in adult education. They get very, very broad usage, and we have had a lot of comments from our partner organizations as well as our government relations folks in terms of how valuable these are. So if we want to look at the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit about the data. So we have some data. We're looking at the fact sheet for the United States total here on this slide. And so we have data on the adult education population. And there's a lot of different ways of looking at that, but what we looked at was the number of working age adults without a high school diploma in the state. And one of the reasons that we looked at that is we don't get too many questions about, well, how is that established? Because it's directly from census data. So, and it's also the number of adults in a state without a high school diploma is the number that the federal government uses to allocate the funds, the adult ed funds across states, and to identify your share of federal funds. So we also know that another large portion of our population is the adults who don't speak English very well. And so there's an overlap, as you can see on the two data sets, where a number of those adults who are English language learners also do not have a high school diploma. So we tried to portray that in a visual way so people could see the overlap. So we also have some specific data on the challenges that our population faces. And, in terms of that, we're looking at, unemployment, not in the labor force, and on public assistance. Now, the data source for that is the American Community Survey. And for this year, the 2019 ACS 5-year PUMS files. So that's, that's a public use multi-source data file. And it's a lot more detailed and accurate than what you can find by just going on census.gov and looking at the ACS tables. So there are some metrics in there to zero in specifically on our population. It's always valuable to look at the overall unemployment rate, but this unemployment rate, for example, is specifically for that population without a high school diploma. And I always suggest that people compare it to the overall because it's much higher for our population. And we think that that's some valuable information for demonstrating the need for your programs. Okay, and then on the next slide, we have some participation data. We show for our enrollment, the proportion of it that falls into the categories of adult basic education, adult secondary education, and English language learners. And that includes the English literacy and civics students as well. So we break that down for the nation and also for each state. And we also, we have funding information. We show the amount of funds expended through the federal funds and also through the non-federal contributions to adult education. And then the performance data, we're showing, just a few data sets that we thought are pertinent. The high school credentials awarded, the number of students that, had a skill gain, and those enrolled in integrated education and training programs. So that's pretty much the sources of data. And just one more thing, the data on the enrollment, the participation, and the funding comes directly from the national reporting system. So we don't collect that from states. We collect it through the federal government from the national reporting system. Okay, thank you, Cheryl.
Thanks, Pat. So now I want to take take a few minutes and actually look at Michigan's data. So what we have here is a screenshot of the of part of the Michigan fact sheet. And so what I'd like to do is do a little chat activity looking at this. So I'm putting up a portion of the Michigan sheet, and this is for 2019-2020 data from July 1, 2019 to June 30th, 2020. So if you take a look at the population, the adult ed population up there, that's specific to Michigan, and it is from the census data, as Pat mentioned. The challenges, and then the enrollment. So if anyone wants to type in the chat any observations or questions that you see or that you think someone looking at this fact sheet might have that you would want to be prepared to answer or to be able to discuss. So I'm just going to give you a minute or two, and if I'm not seeing the chat, I guess I can see the chat, I'm not sure, but if Patrick could let me know if there is anything in the chat.
Sure, while folks are doing that, I have a couple of things that are brought to mind, Cheryl and Patricia. One is that, certainly I think that 72,000 number, those without a high school credential and that do not speak English very well, often we kind of think about maybe those two populations as separate and really thinking about the intersection of many of those populations. We often graph by ABE versus ESL, but we need to think about that. I also think that even that percentage of children living in the household headed by an adult without high school diploma, through our Michigan reporting system that goes into the national reporting system. That's why it's so critical to identify some of those barriers and some of that important. And one of those questions that we use for our Michigan reporting system is, are you a parent, of a school age or, child? And so that information just is so critical when we're having these conversations. So I see there are things in the chat now, so I won't take away, but those are just some observations.
Those are excellent.
Yeah.
And I think that intersection of those two populations is one of the things that these fact sheets do that we don't see very often in other fact sheets. So
yeah. So one of the questions in the chat is, does without a high school diploma include those with a foreign diploma? So the source is the census, and the census is self-reporting. So when an individual responds that they don't have a high school diploma, or they do, it's from the census. So this would be the people who respond that they don't have a high school diploma. So we have to assume that means they don't have any high school diploma earned in this country or a foreign country. So that was one question.
And if I could add to that,
sure.
in the adult education system, I think that is part of the intake that adult education programs gather on entry is the education level of the participant. And again, that's often self-reported. But I know in Arizona, we do, if someone says they have, a high school diploma or anything from another country, that does get reported in the NRS, and there's a category where it distinguishes between US based or not US based. So
yeah,
there's another question for you both around are the do not speak, and I think this is a very important distinguishing remark to make. Are the do not speak English very well figures contained in the no high school credential numbers, or are they separate?
It's separate. The overlap is the 72,384, but the total number in your state who do not speak English very well or at all is that 220,587. And then without a high school diploma is the 519,000 number. So the overlap there is the 72. 5,000. Does that answer the question?
I think so. I think, yeah, they just wanted
Okay.
that. Yep. A lot of great comments, interesting comments about being surprised by the number of children, the percentage of children living in a household without a diploma. I would just, any thoughts on that from either of you?
I think that is interesting. I believe nationally it was something in the 12% range, Pat. I'm not sure if that.
Yes.
So Michigan is actually has a smaller percentage than nationally, and that is one of the interesting things that you can do if you go to the link where these fact sheets are, and it is prominent, pretty prominent on the NASDAE website. If you go to that, you can toggle back and forth between states, and you can look at where other states are. So like Michigan might want to look at Illinois or Wisconsin and just see, how these percentages change by states, because it's pretty interesting to do that comparison. But yeah, even though it's lower than the national average, it's still a significant percentage of the population. So.
Absolutely. A couple other just observations, I think, and would love your feedback from both of you is, Christian was saying this just lets us know how many or how few, we're really impacting or having an impact with. Another comment from Susan about the ESL difficulty with the language can result in no or little income. Kristen Allen was saying a proportion or more of the ELLs are in school than those without diplomas. So lots of good feedback.
Those are excellent observations. I do think that observation of the proportion that's actually being served, that's something that's significant in Arizona as well, that I constantly am pointing out. It feels like we're barely scratching the surface on the need for adult education services in the WIOA system. So I think that's a really important takeaway from this, from looking at these data sets together.
Sure. And if you look at nationally, the most current data shows about 22 million individuals, adults without a high school diploma in that age range. And we're serving about 1 million of them. So it's a limitation in resources. And we know that there are, maybe less formal programs, faith-based programs, community-based programs who are also serving adults. We don't capture that in this. And, they don't have outcomes, they don't have data that we can look at. But still, we know that the proportion we're actually able to reach is really very small compared to what the need is. But I saw another comment that I always thought our data should capture those people who are underemployed and live in poverty. Even a person may have a high school diploma, they may still require education to help them. And, we certainly know that. And, these fact sheets, when we finally decided on the format and the data sets, we took a lot of advice from a lot of partner programs. And I think what we really wanted to highlight was the need for adult education among this population that is not arguable. In other words, no one, if sometimes when you talk about other estimates that, have a lot of credibility among the providers and those of us who know the system, among those who make funding decisions, for example, sometimes they will argue on the legitimacy of data that is projected, but we don't get an argument about the data that comes directly from the census. So that's why we chose this. And these particular data sets, you can't tell the whole story on one page, but you can give a really, really good snapshot of why the program is needed and the limitation of the funding.
So we're going to do another chat activity, probably pretty quick, but we're looking at the the other half, basically, although our enrollment is still part of this. So I'm basically going to ask you the same question. If you look at Michigan's adult education enrollment number, along with performance and funding, so this is all, again, this is the data that comes out of the NRS system, the National Reporting System. Are there any observations or questions that you have, or you think someone looking at this might have, that you would want to be prepared to discuss? And Patrick, you can let me know if there's any activity in the chat, and I'll just wait a minute and see.
Sure, definitely. I think, when I see this as we're waiting for folks to turn in, is that number for enrolled in an IET program. I certainly think that there could be some conversation around why that number is that number. Because I'm sure when you look at other states, I think probably that's a little bit higher. And so that would be something that I think is worth certain conversation. And then just from an advocacy perspective, I do think that the non-federal funding amounts, not all providers may have access to certain amounts of those dollars. And so I think that when we're speaking to what you both were saying about advocating, there's a story that has to accompany much of these data sets and these pieces. And that's just so important that our providers have that understanding and clarity of the spaces that they're responsible for and that they're part of and are able to articulate that. There is a question from Sharon about how often information is updated.
In the fact sheets? Go ahead, Pat, I'll let you take that one.
That's a real good question. We were a little bit behind schedule. We were, timing this, in terms of getting it out in the first quarter of the year. So, this data sheet reflects, the NRS program data that for the year ending June 30th, 2020. So it feels like it's a little bit old at this point. So we have decided to accelerate our schedule. We plan to, in the April to June timeframe to update it with the year ending 2021. And from then on, we expect to update it on that schedule annually. We currently have 2 years posted online, though, on our website that you can toggle back and forth year to year. And as Cheryl mentioned, you can look at any state and compare.
That's
and
great.
there's some other.
I was just going to add to what you said, Pat, about the frequency. So there's definitely some angst with many states as far as getting the last year's data out, because most states saw a pretty significant drop in enrollment. It was a full year of pandemic impact, and so. But we believe at NASDAE that getting the data out, looking at it, and being able to talk about it and frame it and put it in the context of what was going on that year is going to be important to us, because just about every education system, K-12, community college, post-secondary, all of them saw were significantly impacted by the pandemic. So go ahead, Pat.
And our workforce partners as well. So, there's nobody who's going to have, data that looks really good, that didn't lose, significant proportions of enrollment and also performance. So we do feel that the information is still going to be important. And we think that some of those challenges that our population faces are going to be, I think we're going to see some changes in those numbers that are important. And as we go forward, I know one thing that I've been trying to keep an eye on is a lot of students never returned to school after the pandemic closures. And a large proportion of those were in the high school years. So I think as we get through the next few years, that's going to have tremendous implications for adult education. We have a lot of people who never completed high school in 2020, 2021, and even this year as well. So, and I think we have some good comments in the chat too. Someone mentioned that people might not understand who might fall into the ASC category. That's certainly
absolutely true.
Yes. And, you know, I think Sheryl and I have talked about this so much. People want to know, what's our graduation rate? So how many people got a high school diploma? Well, 2,571. You know, and they want to calculate a graduation rate against our total enrollment. But, you know, we have to explain that, no, it's the ASC population, where these are people who are at least at a 9th grade level of functioning when they come to us. And so that's the number you should calculate on. In that respect, Michigan does very well, because you've obviously moved some people, you know, beyond that number of the higher level students.
And so I think to Patrick's comment on the IET numbers, I think that is also the 198 might look like a really small number if you're looking at the total 23,000 up there. But if you're looking at which the student group that might be ready for an IET program, it's more likely going to be that ASE population, which is a much smaller pot of students. So.
Yeah.
There were a couple of other, oh, I'm sorry, Patricia.
No, go ahead.
I just was going to say there was a couple of other questions, and I wanted to go back to one because I think it's important for everyone to hear. Is there was a question about the difference between unemployed and not in the labor force. And I know you both have a great answer for that.
Yeah. So, yeah, someone is counted as unemployed if they are seeking employment. So if they're registered in the unemployment system and seeking employment. But the unemployment system also captures data on the people who are employed traditionally. And so those not in the labor force are the difference between those employed and those who are unemployed. So not in the labor force means that they do not have a job, or at least, you know, not a job that's going to show up on the records. I mean, they might be, you know, a babysitter or a house cleaner that's not, you know, having withholdings and reporting, but not in the labor force is they don't have a job that's reportable, and they are not seeking employment. And that becomes a critical number, because, you know, we want to help those individuals too. We want to give them the job skills they need.
And I want to add, in Arizona anyway, I know that when I work with my workforce partners and those that are in the employment services and in employment development, there is a lot. Arizona has a higher than national average of people that are not in the labor force, and there's a lot of concern at the state level on that as an economic factor in the state. So there is a desire to address that population that is not in the labor force. And I think adult education is a system that actually does a good job of that. We may have students that come to us and they are not in the labor force at all. They've got significant barriers, or maybe they just don't you know, they've never thought of a career type opportunity. And so they are able to move from not being in the labor force to being employed. And also we do have a significant population in Arizona that are employed, but it's outside of the UI wage system. And so that's an issue that we always need to address when we're trying to capture our data on employment. So.
And someone commented that if someone is in jail, they're not in the labor force. And I think that, you know, if they are in prison, that's true. So,
yeah.
Patrick?
There was just a quick question, and then I see the question about equity, but I feel like we'll talk about that in a couple of different ways. And so maybe we can kind of address that at the end too, but specifically about where does the number of youth 16 to 24 without the high school diploma, not enrolled in school and unemployed come from?
That is also the ACS public use multi-source data, which has the metrics. Our analyst uses the metrics to go in and find specifically for that population.
And those are sometimes referred to as disconnected youth. I know many in Arizona, we have a an organization that we work with that specifically addresses that we call them opportunity youth in Arizona. And I think when Pat was speaking to the impact of the pandemic, there has been a pretty dramatic increase in that population. Not reflected here. This is, well, a part of this year that we're reporting on was pandemic impacted the last third of the year. But I think when we look at our data for 2020, 2021, we're going to see that number has increased.
And maybe we can put this one then. Oh, go ahead, Patricia. Sorry.
I saw a question about whether the levels are determined only on reading scores, or does it include ABE students because they didn't test well on CABE, CASAS math test. And this is from the NRS. So as you know, even if you test in both reading or math, when you enter the data into the NRS reporting system for your state, a level is selected. So we have no control over that. It's
level on entry. It's entry level. And I think that's why you see the 2,500, over 2,500 high school credentials, even though in Michigan, there was almost 1,500 that entered at a secondary level. Those, enough of those ABE students entered at an ABE level, but they moved over to a secondary level and were able to get their high school credentials. So I think that's good to understand. In Arizona, we use as our entry level, we use the lowest score, and we use TABE testing. So that's how it's determined. But I think there is some variation among states as far as how they determine entry level.
Yes, but it is a decision, at entry, whether to use a reading score or a math score, and then it gets reported into NRS. So we're just using the NRS data. So,
any other comments or questions before?
There was a question, and it's a big question, and it's a question
Okay.
we're having in our state. Is the funding levels here? Do they produce equity, right? And I think that's one of the biggest conversations, especially that's come out of the pandemic. I know we were having it before, but it really has been exacerbated and amplified through the pandemic. So I wonder what both of your thoughts are nationally around that, and what you're seeing kind of as trends in that regard.
I'll start, Pat, and then you can add. When I look at so this funding is what is reported in the NRS system. It's reported annually, but there's so it's what states are receiving. The federal is what they're receiving for WIOA funding, and then there's a required match and maintenance of effort, and that gets reported as non-federal funding. And so this is what Michigan is reporting to OCTAE as far as what they consider the state's contribution to the WIOA system. So it's not going to include all funding across the board for any adult ed type services. And when I look at Michigan's numbers and compare it to Arizona, I am like, I have to tell you, in Arizona, we receive a very similar, slightly more pot of federal funding. I think we have a high immigrant population, and so we get a lot of the IELCE special pot of funding that comes with that. But our state contribution is $4.5 million. So we are barely able to meet our required match for our federal funding. And it is a real struggle, and it does have equity implications. Definitely, we are a severely underfunded system in Arizona. And when I look at Michigan's number and many other states, and you're definitely not overfunded at all. I think there are still there's still underfunding. And when you look at the enrollment compared to the need, compared to the population, it's not it's not an adequately funded system, but it is so much more adequate than what we're doing in Arizona. So I'll just put that out there. I point that out. I like to have a handful of states that I can point to that say, look at how Minnesota is funded, look at how New Mexico is funded, look at how, and compared to Arizona, and it's pretty dismal in Arizona what we're scraping together at the state level.
Yeah, and you'll find a great deal of variance if you look through, the other state fact sheets, because the statute, the law requires that the state contribute an amount equivalent to at least 25% of the total amount of funds. But it's a floor. So certainly, as you can see, your state does very well. The federal funding, while, we feel certainly that it's under-resourced compared to the need, it is allocated, on a fair basis, by formula, based on that count of the people in need. But states, as Cheryl pointed out, her state with a similar federal funding level only contributes to 4.5 million. So, you are fortunate to be in a state where the need is recognized, and
and I think funding and how funds those how states allocate those funds is definitely one of those equity policy decisions that impact equity. So I know in Arizona I have great concerns about ensuring that we are looking at the areas of the state that have the highest need and allocate so that we can allocate our funding proportionally to address the need, and not just looking at general population numbers. If we just looked at general population numbers, almost all of our funding would go to Phoenix programs, and we wouldn't be serving the Navajo Nation. We wouldn't be serving the rural areas across Arizona hardly at all, because the population center is very dramatically in the Maricopa County, Phoenix area. So you have to look as funding's being distributed, states should be looking at the population, of course, but you have to factor in other things like you can look at some of the same challenge numbers, like what's the percent of youth without a high school diploma in that area? What are the percentage of children living in poverty? How many adults lack a secondary diploma? What's the English language population? That needs to be looked at a community level when states are allocating resources across the state. So I think that's one of the equity considerations that we talk about as a policy consideration that falls under the state administration. So I don't know, did that answer at least somewhat we could spend the rest of our time talking about that question.
I think that's I think that was very fitting. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so going on to high school equivalency information collection. If you've been in adult education for a while, you know that the high school equivalency testing and other options for getting a high school alternative diploma that landscape has changed significantly over the past decade. So what we realize is there's no one place where you can just look at a document and find out for each state, what are the options available? So we're in the process of doing a program survey where we're collecting information on all high school equivalency and alternate secondary credential options by state. And these are state recognized credentials too. We know that there's some that aren't very legitimate out there and that aren't recognized, but we're collecting them from your state director. So we hope to have a report sometime in early April if our collection continues to proceed on time, but it'll be in the near future. And so you'll be able to see not only which states use the GED as opposed to which states use the high set tests, but you'll also be able to see the unique state options that have been created where there's maybe a concordance of using one of the test subjects on one of the national tests and using, high school credits, some college credits to substitute for high school credits missing. So we look forward to having that information published. Now, an employer survey. What we've thought would be interesting, because we hear a lot of narrative that, maybe employers prefer a real high school diploma. So we've been working with our partners at COABE to try to collect some information on the hiring preferences of companies in terms of are they really looking for a traditional high school diploma, or are they okay with the alternative or equivalency credentials? And I suspect that currently with the the unemployment rate so low and employers scrambling for diplomas, that they're probably not being as selective as they may have been in other times. But that's our high school equivalency data collection.
So that wraps up the 3 initiatives that we wanted to present today. So we're going to just go probably fairly quickly through the professional development that we engage in. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the National Training Institute. And this is an annual event for state directors and state staff to provide training developed around state directors' most needed topics. So NASDAE does conduct a survey of state directors as part of the NTI planning process. And you can see on the slide what the topics that identified in the most recent survey that was conducted. And so the, recruitment, digital literacy, and that's for both students and staff, immigration, pre-apprenticeships, the integrated English literacy and civics education and pathways for English language learners, and college and career navigators. So we take that information, and then we also consult with OCTAE, and often the NTI follows up on training that OCTAE does. So they usually do an annual state directors meeting with state staff earlier in the year than our NTI. And so we are able to jump off some of those things and do a deeper dive into those topics that OCTAE presented. The last 2 NTIs have been virtual, 100% virtual. We are not sure what we're going to do as far as a model, but we're talking. We're in the planning process for the next NTI right now. Did you want to add anything on NTI, Pat?
No, we'll talk a little bit more about it, I think, at the end of the presentation. But we do have all the presentations. Again, the advantage of virtual conferences are recorded and they're posted on our website. So there's some really good information on all those topics there. And typically we do this toward the end of October, early November. Again, we're trying to navigate all the uncertainty with state allowances for travel and also any further pandemic issues. And it's we need a crystal ball. So if you have one, send it to us. So thank you.
I also want to point out that NASDAE.org, that website that's at the bottom of most of these slides, you can go on there and you can find the recorded sessions from the last NTI that we did. That's also where you can find the fact sheet portal, the portal to the fact sheet that we were showing, so that you can go in and toggle between states and between years. So LEAD Institute. So LEAD actually stands for Leadership Excellence and Development. And so this was a significant effort that NASDAE engaged in. Took about, what, Pat, 2 years to get it off the ground, but it is off the ground. It's a 9-month state cohort training and it's designed to cover all aspects of adult education and leadership in the WIOA era. So this is just I'm not going to read you everything, and this is also on our website, this information, but it is a deep dive into leadership. It's not a workshop on leadership. It is an intensive training over several months, and states send teams from local programs and also state staff can participate. So we had 8 states that completed this training this year, and then we have 1 state that is planned for next year as of now. And Arizona is one of the states that completed a LEAD cohort. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of just a snapshot of our experience. So what I have on the slide here is actually a screenshot of one of the slides. It was actually my opening remarks for the beginning of our LEAD Institute training that we did. And it shows why we decided to invest in LEAD Institute in Arizona. And my main goal was to create a culture of leadership. And I stated this, where being a leader doesn't mean being perfect. It means being fully committed and willing to continue to learn. And so that's what we said we wanted to get out of this. We wanted leaders to embrace continuation of learning and continuing to develop their leadership skills. We have requested the participants to commit to continue to apply what they learned going forward and to continue their learning. So even though we just wrapped up the LEAD Institute with the last session, and it was like a 5-hour session a couple of weeks ago, we are going to continue touching base and checking in and having some accountability for the implementation of what they've learned. As part of the Institute, states plan with AIR. This is presented by the American Institutes for Research. As part of the planning with AIR, the state selects the area of focus and a central inquiry question for the participant teams to center their work on. And in Arizona, our focus was to prepare learners for success in college, career, and life. And that's actually our mission statement. And our central inquiry question was, what program innovations are needed to improve the quality and implementation of IET and bridge programs for students? So our local participant teams developed innovative plans to implement during the next few months and into the next program year. So I'm anxious to see what comes out of that. So any questions on either NTI or LEAD before I move us along? And I'm looking at my watch and I know we only have a few minutes. So
there was a question on NTI. Does NTI use a train the trainer model? Not really. It's an intense training. It's not a typical conference where there are a lot of options. We go through a specific menu of trainings. And again, it's based on a needs survey that we've done with state directors. But there, if you go online and you look at the resources, you can see, a lot of presenters there that have expertise, and you can certainly reach out and, reach out to me if you're not finding what you're looking for.
So Pat, I'm going to let you go, and I believe we have like 5 minutes left. So I don't know if you want to just.
So yeah, I'll talk fast. So colleague questions and sharings. We like to help our members and their staffers to network. So they'll send me questions, which I can put out to the field and collect responses. And we just put in a couple of examples here. One was, does anybody else, manage or put grant funds toward a volunteer literacy organization? We've had questions on, what is your process for high school equivalency transcripts? Do you do it in-house? Do you use a provider? And, whatever a state director or staffer might be interested in hearing from their colleagues, we're willing to put the question out. So, and then I'll turn it back to Cheryl.
So another thing that we have done is issued, we've produced issue briefs. We have 5 so far, and there's the topics, what they're on. They're also available on the website. And what these issue briefs do is they concisely cover a topic. And so I don't think any of them are more than 2 pages. And they cover for each of the topics why you should care about it, what legislation you can watch, what important issues should be considered on this topic, questions that you can ask. You can go back to your state and ask, and then also cases from the field. So those 5 areas right there, there is an issue brief on each one of those that dives into those areas.
Okay. Government relations. We work with a firm that is very well known in Washington and very experienced to provide us with the most up-to-date information on what's going on with legislation that will affect adult education, or, in this case, there's an example here of some funding opportunities that are available either to the state adult education office or sometimes to local providers. So we share that information with our state directors as well. You can check out some of these on the PowerPoint when you get it. So.
And then the last part, and Pat, I'm going to let you wrap it up with this: new practices on the radar.
Okay. So I do want to say that just one thing in working with government relations, NASDAE is not a lobbying organization. So we don't go and ask for money. We put information out, and we work with partners, who do a lot of that kind of advocacy work. But in terms of new practices, here's what we're hearing from states. Immigrant integration metrics and civics education standards. And California is doing a lot of work with that. Of course, they have huge ESL populations. So, and we can direct you to people who have more information on these. Establishing a tech plan for each student as part of their individual learning plan. Contextualizing digital literacy and skill building, and how you integrate that into your instruction, especially into your IET. Self-assessment of digital literacy for teachers. California and New Hampshire have some models there. Staff barriers are similar to students' barriers. We have part-time staff, they're working at a distance and they have competing priorities. So that's really important to get your staff up to speed on digital literacy. Creating pre-apprenticeship programs. And we have some expertise in New Mexico State Director who has written a lot of curriculum in a past position. And we have some innovations from Nevada. And then the use of navigators and, especially digital navigators, but also we're seeing more and more use of navigators in terms of transitions to employment and transitions to post-secondary education. So those are just some of the trends that we're seeing. And again, there's a lot of information on some of these new types of initiatives on the NTI page on our website. So let's see. I think.
Yeah, I think you did it, Pat. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then I think we can just take a minute, and if there's any final questions, and
Well, I want to thank you both. If there's any final questions, we can certainly pop them out. I really just want to say thank you. You should see the number of notes that I've taken of just thoughts and ideas from both of you. It's just very encouraging to know that we are a part of a larger wheel that is turning, and that there are other states that are going through many challenges that we're also facing, but also there are opportunities that lie ahead. And I plan to follow up. I know some of our board members and other members have been messaging me throughout this presentation saying we need to pick their brain a little bit more about some of these things. So we may do that as well. But are there any final questions for Cheryl and Patricia as we wrap up today? Well,
I'll just leave you with a concept that NASDAE is a resource for you. So take advantage of it. And
wonderful. Well, we will. Don't say that too much, but no, in all seriousness, we thank you so much. Thank you for being the representatives that you are on the national landscape for adult education. And thank you for being a great partner to us here in Michigan for this institute. So thank you both, Patricia and Cheryl, and thank you everyone. We're going on a little break now, and then our last session of the day at 2:15. So take care, everyone.
Thank you.